I'm going to. Hi, this is Elizabeth Clare and Elton Brewington, and we've had a wonderful day today. We've had speakers all through, and you will get all these recordings on our website as well as on our channel. This is Brightside Global Trade TV. You're streaming with us, and we appreciate your time. If you like any of these presentations or you want to buy any of these books, please make sure you snap a shot so we know that you're listening and that you're on the agenda to promote business. You know, businesses cannot grow and thrive unless they have sales. So we hope that this will encourage you to do that. And write a comment, like a page, and go to the person that you like to their website and follow them. So I'd like to introduce Deena Lindstedt. I hope I pronounced your name right. And we had a beautiful conversation earlier this month, and we talked about what if Shakespeare was a woman? The strong characters in Shakespeare, and she's a historian, so she's going to take you through that. And over to you, Deena. You can introduce yourself.
I mean, I have to tell you, Deena, I don't know. I'm listening to your proposition, but I mean, you know, it's an interesting one, and I'd love to engage more dialogue about it. But I mean, you know, women and men in their definitions through that time probably explored all kinds of avenues of cultivation, but it's a curious one, and I want to hear more about it, but also, you know, a big fan of Shakespeare. And so tell us, talk to us, share with us.
We can't hear you, your mic.
You're on mute.
There, how's that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're not the first man that's questioned I have 3 sons, and even one of my sons at mother, you know, so I'm very familiar, but I have to tell you how this came about. First of all, for those who are not fans of Shakespeare or don't know too much about him, but the Shakespeare authorship question has been around for centuries, and that's because William Shakespeare, the man, does not fit the profile necessary to write those beautiful plays. First of all, he was probably not educated, or if he was, he had very limited education. He didn't travel outside of England. He didn't speak any foreign languages, maybe a little bit of Latin that they learned in the grammar school, but that's about all. So about 100 years ago, a man in England, a teacher and a historian, came up with Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. And this man fit the role of Shakespeare perfectly. That's the profile, I should say. And he was highly educated. First of all, he was the 17th Earl of Oxford. So he was in Queen Elizabeth I's court, very influential. He was the Lord Chamberlain. But he was educated by a tutor, and then he went to Cambridge, and then he traveled abroad. He spoke many foreign languages, and he also had troops of players. He had the Oxford men and the Oxford boys, and those troops of players would travel around England and perform for the rural audiences. So when I was researching Edward de Vere, I went to college after I retired from a career. In fact, Lisa's presentation really interested me because I had 25 years in working in the insurance industry, and I started in the 1950s. So that was a time where women were still pretty much homemakers, and I was entering into a man's world. So I really understood what she was talking about perfectly as a woman. But I did quite well in my career as well, but I did take retirement. And so my career as a writer and a novelist didn't start till after I retired. So I really identified with your talk, Lisa, and thank you very much. But I didn't come to talk about that. I came to talk about Shakespeare being a woman. And when you start looking at the plays themselves, you have to wonder, you have to realize that the Shakespeare plays were very, very popular with women, and they always have been. And the reason why is because of the roles that they played. You look at Portia in Merchant of Venice, and Kate in Taming of the Shrew, and Helen in All's Well That Ends Well, and Viola, and even Lady Macbeth. And these roles were so powerful, but you have to wonder how a 16th century man could have written these roles. So that's where I came up with the notion. Well, you know, when I went to college after I retired, and my professor said, well, Deena, you couldn't really expect anybody to think a woman could have been the author because they weren't allowed an education. They couldn't go to school. They were totally subservient to their fathers and then to their husbands. And well, and Elizabeth talked a little bit about how women were treated. In fact, you know, if you want to travel in the Middle East, you'll see a little bit of what the 16th century women were like. So a woman, but when I was in my Shakespeare class, I had to research Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, for a debate team as to whether it was William Shakespeare or whether it was Edward de Vere. And when I started researching him, I ran across his second wife. Her name was Elizabeth Trentham. And I thought, wow. And so I started looking into her life, and there before my eyes, she fit the role of Portia. She fit the role of Kate in Taming of the Shrew. She fit these roles. And I thought, if there's got to be a woman Shakespeare, it's got to be Elizabeth Trentham, Edward de Vere's wife. And doesn't it make perfect sense that they would have been, since we've already decided that Edward de Vere is probably the most likely candidate to be Shakespeare, wouldn't it make sense that his second wife, Elizabeth Trentham, would have been his collaborator? Well, then as I was researching her, I found something that I just was so excited about, and that is Shakespeare started, the first plays came out right around 1588 to 1590. Nobody's quite sure. But then he retired Shakespeare, the man, retired in 1612. But he didn't die until 1616. Well, when I was looking up at Elizabeth Trentham, I realized that she died in 1612, the exact same year that Shakespeare retired. I thought, well, if she was the author, she would have had to needed a front, because first of all, here she was working or living in the palace. She was the maid of honor with Queen Elizabeth for 10 years. She absolutely refused to marry. She was highly intelligent. She wrote poetry. And she was wealthy in her own right. And she came from a wealthy family up in the Midlands of England. And yet she refused, and she was very pretty too. And so she refused all these offers of marriage. And I think what she just couldn't bring herself to be subservient to men. I think she was just a strong lady. But she did marry Edward de Vere. And I suspect maybe they were in collaboration with the very first play, which was King Henry VI. And that play was interesting because that's the play with Joan of Arc. Well, during the during the war with Spain, the Queen Elizabeth would have needed to show that she was a strong leader, and as a woman, she could still be the leader of the military to fight the Spanish. So to have this play come out at the very first Shakespeare play, and to feature Joan of Arc, which would typify a comparison between Queen Elizabeth and Joan of Arc. And if you looked at paintings of Joan of Arc, you see her in an armor in front of the troops, leading the troops to battle with a banner flying. And then you see a painting of Queen Elizabeth I in Tilbury, where she is wearing an armor and giving a speech. I may be a lonely woman but I have the heart of a king. And she really showed her strength. And I think that's why that first play came out as propaganda, to promote her as the leader of the English people in fighting the Spanish. So that was the first play, but I'm kind of getting off my subject here. But Elizabeth Trentham, if they were in collaboration, there was a major problem with thinking that Edward de Vere alone by himself was Shakespeare, the sole playwright, because he died too soon. He died in 1604. And the plays, like I mentioned before, more plays were produced and written and played clear until 1612, when Shakespeare, the man, retired. Well, somebody had to write those plays. There were at least 8 of them. Maybe there were even as many as 12. After 1604, well, who better to write those plays than his wife, Elizabeth Trentham? So that's how I came about to wanting to write this novel about her life. And so for the next 10 years, I started to research her, and I was really helped along the way. So many coincidences happened, not only with the fact that of the year that she died, but also that and the English, in England, they started to put all of their archives on the internet. And lo and behold, Elizabeth Trentham's will showed up. And in her will, she leaves money to her dumb man, D-U-M-B. Well, a dumb man in the 1600s was somebody that couldn't speak. Well, if Shakespeare was her front, she would have had to pay him to be quiet. So I think that in her will, when she leaves money to her dumb man, she's continuing to pay William Shakespeare to keep silent. And so I was convinced that between the 2 clues of her dying the same year he retired, leaving money to her dumb man, I thought this has got to be the other Shakespeare besides Edward de Vere. So then I started writing my book and researching it, even taking a trip to England. I visited Rochester in Staffordshire, which is where Elizabeth Trentham grew up, so I could write about her childhood. But when I was writing my play, I thought, well, do I want to write just a historical book? And I needed to make it a novel because I was inventing this life of Elizabeth Trentham based on the plays. And I thought, no, I don't think so. I think I better. So I was impressed with some movies that I had seen where there are flashbacks from one century to another century. And so I thought, well, I think I'll pattern my book that way. And so I did. So my novel has parallel stories. I start off in the modern day where Cynthia Parsons, who's an English teacher, or a history teacher, and she is contacted by an elderly woman who lives in Arkansas. And this woman has found an original page written by Shakespeare. Now you have to know that when the first folio was published in 1623, which is actually almost 100 years ago, or 400 years ago, but after all of the plays were published, they vanished. All the original documents vanished, and nobody has ever found any original writing whatsoever of the plays. The only thing that's left with Shakespeare are 6 signatures, and you can go on the internet and see Shakespeare's 6 signatures. And if you look at him, he doesn't even spell his name the same. They're signatures from legal documents. And so there's another proof that how could he be this wonderful playwright? At any rate, after I was able to start my book and show that, I thought the best way to show it is to come up with an original page. And when Sudie McFadden, my elderly lady, when she finds this just one page from A Midsummer's Night's Dream, it falls out of a book of prayers that she has inherited, that's been handed down through the generations. And she's convinced that her ancestor was in fact Shakespeare. And she contacts this English teacher, history teacher, who takes a trip to Arkansas, and they start their project, which is to prove that Sudie's ancestor was in fact Shakespeare. So then I go back and forth I start off with a contemporary story, and then I switch to a historical chapter. And the first historical chapter is from A Midsummer's Night's Dream, when Elizabeth Trentham is 10 years old. But each historical chapter, I use an actual quote from one of the Shakespeare writings, and the quote, I try to fit it into the theme of that particular chapter. So this the first chapter, historical chapter, starts with this 10-year-old Elizabeth going into the field. And because legend has it that you can, if you go, you can see the fairies on Midsummer's Eve. And so she sneaks out after dark and goes out in the field so she can see the fairies, and she falls asleep. And then she sees all these magical things that you see in the Midsummer Night's Dream play. So that's that first historical chapter. And then I flip back to the contemporary, and I try to make the transition between the modern day and 400 years ago go smoothly. And people that have read my book have said that there is a smooth transition between them, the modern and the historical. And so I think that pretty much tells you about my book. I hope you give it a go. I think I've got a lot of great reviews, and I don't know, Amazon is crazy. I mean, I don't know any people that have published books on Amazon. I have a publisher, and of course they're sent the check from the different Amazon and Barnes and Noble and whoever has the book. But they hold it for 3 months. So even though I published my book in October, I have yet to see a royalty check because Amazon waits 3 months to send it out. So anyway, I guess, do I have time for questions, Elizabeth? Or shall we?
Yeah, I think we can engage a few more questions. So Ramona, we can, I'll work and forth, back and forth with you. But Deena has a question. Tell us, Deena.
Yes, well, first I want to just say, Deena, it's so rare that there is another Deena in the same room, in the same virtual space. So I love that. And I also want to applaud. I completely understand the amount of research that you must have gathered to be able to write, interweaving the historical details that you did. So I applaud you for that. I'll also share with you that the very first course I took as a returning undergraduate student was a Shakespeare course. And I don't know why I decided to dive in so deeply, but the book that I got, you'll be familiar with it, The Riverside Shakespeare. How big is that book?
I have no idea. I don't know that I've really seen that one, to tell you the truth.
It is a huge tome, and it probably weighs 40 pounds.
Wow.
But anyway, I just want to thank you for this. This is just wonderful to hear about.
Thank you. Well, the research is the fun part. In fact, I got so involved in the research, I forgot to write a lot of times.
I can relate.
Amazing. That was a good question, Deena. Any more questions regarding great observations, and your research seems to be spot on. I mean, I can't, you can't argue with the research to some extent. I mean, in the fact of the timelines, and it would make sense. I mean, and the profound element of that, and what's so curious to me is that, the roles of men and women over all this time have changed so dramatically, so incredibly. I mean, men and women, you take somewhere going, that was what, about the 16th or 15th, 13th century.
It was 16th century with Queen Elizabeth and then into King James.
Yeah. So I mean, where have we been? Where are we going? And how will we end up? And curious in terms of the roles that men and women have played, and will play. And it's really quite profound in the end of things. And so, but let's just stick a pin in it. I mean, it's like the weather. If you don't like it today, I don't know, things will change. And even now, as we now, start to engage, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes here, I mean, the role of men and women, traditionally that they were, and now, in the role of men, women, and alternative, I don't know. I mean, what does it mean for the future of our culture and the power of our culture, and what it will mean for the next generations? So your book is engaging. It asks a real profound and ominous question. I don't know if you'll be able to determine the answer in the reading of, now make me take a title read on the plays.
Well,
You
I
know,
might just even convince you because I found more proof that Elizabeth Trenholm was in fact Shakespeare. But
yeah.
I'll let you read the book and find it for yourself.
Right, right. Well, that'd be fine. That'd be fine. So I'm profound. I encourage you. We encourage all authors. Because nobody's wrong, and you have
Yeah.
a story to tell, and it looks like you have done the privilege of giving us some research behind your story. But in terms of an author and writer, William Shakespeare was a brilliant mind, and I've
Yes,
seen
yes, she
some really
was.
brilliant. Well, so but at the end of the day, what does it mean for the future of our culture as we see it and where we're going? And and everybody's pushing the writer, push the writer to write the
Yeah.
story or to tell the story, and nobody's been able to surpass Shakespeare.
Well,
Nobody
in my
actually
book, I
will.
have my elderly lady, Sudi. She says the timing wasn't right for a woman to emerge, and the timing is finally right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's just listen. Let's listen, and it's an interesting time to be absorbed and observant. To be absorbed and observant. And I mean, of course, I'm a big fan. I encourage you all to explore, your personalities and your powers and your strengths. And I mean, look at and I think about the history of the Supreme Court and how Jackson now, Brown Jackson, is becoming a Supreme Court justice when not that long ago, we've only had men as Supreme Court justices. And now we're getting more and more women who are Supreme Court justices, and what that will mean for the future of our culture. And the power and preserving element. So I'm there with you. Let's look into it. And I engage you to come back and let's talk a little bit more about it. And maybe we can get you to read it, a play or a segment of the play from the perspective of that angle and see what we come up with. Now, and even Tisha, you're doing a presentation today too, right? And so we want to, I mean, the roles, say what you say, Ramona, tell me.
I said it's Miss Alexandra and
Okay,
goes
very
next,
good.
and I think then Tisha, right?
Okay, very good, very good. Okay,
So-
so we have to move on. But thanks so
Right.
much, Deena, for your
You're very welcome,
participation.
and thank you for inviting me.
You're
Appreciate
very
it.
welcome, very welcome. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Deena.
Yes, you
Yeah,
bet.
yeah, yeah. So let's move on. It's been a really engaging day, and we're excited by each of you, and you have a perspective on things that's just outstanding. We live in an amazing time. We really, really live in an amazing time, and we are here now to listen to the story of Alexandra, who was the foremost. Her occupation was in one area, and because of his condition or circumstance, now she has taken on a new proposal, and we want to hear her story. And so I'm gonna hand this over now to Ramona. Ramona, you got the floor.
Welcome, Alexandra. I'm very intrigued by the title, Holistic Approach to Self-Confidence.
Thank you.
And I think we're all waiting to hear your perspective on it and share your story.
Oh, the story. Well, I was a musician for 26 years, a professional violinist. And when the market started collapsing for musicians, pretty much when orchestras in the US started bankrupting, I switched to nursing. I went into a completely different field with no science basis. So I started from scratch as a nurse. I have been a nurse for almost 12 years now. But I also became a real estate investor in 2014. I own my own real estate businesses, several of them. I manage them. I like to be very independent with everything I do. And I'm a very big advocate of perpetual health and perpetual wealth to be achieved in the most independent and self-reliant manner possible. And I completely agree with Lisa that connections are much more important than network, because the very few people that make a difference in your life are the ones that you can connect the best way possible to create a win-win situation for both sides. So with investing and options trading, that's another thing I got into in 2015. I am something that I thought never possible to achieve. I'm a self-made millionaire, but I really didn't do it so much for the money, because I grew up not in a rich environment at all. So my parents always taught me money is not important. What's important is what you do and how you impact society and how you influence others, how you help others. This was always the priority, but I just wanted to put myself through the process, because I never believed I could do something different from music. Being groomed as a musician since age 6, I had no other skills than music and music reading, music related subjects. So when I became a nurse and I saw how the nurses lived around me, the first thing I wanted was to have a really steady job, to feel accomplished on the career side and be helpful to people, because I knew nurses are very needed. You would have a job anywhere in the world if you become a good nurse. Then I saw how nurses lived and how the big corporations that were devouring hospital after hospital after hospital were treating the nurses and the doctors to an extent. So I realized that you couldn't really coast on a job indefinitely. Many of the nurses were very sick. Some of them were sicker than the patients they were treating. And many of them were almost broke, even though they had handsome paychecks due to seniority, the years they had spent on the job, their experience. So then I understood I probably am missing something in this game. Why are these people hardworking, so sick and so poor in many respects? That's when I went into investing. It was another completely new jargon, new parlance, the financial parlance, which seemed very confusing to me at first. So I had been avoiding it for a while, but I grew the curiosity and I realized that I had succeeded in changing professions from an art profession into a science profession. Why can't I learn the language of finance and create assets, multiple streams of income for me and my family? So we're not worried of getting fired or the profession going under water from market conditions. Although with nursing, admittedly, that's hardly possible. Like music and arts in America, they haven't been supported by the government. You always rely on rich people to support your orchestra. Like I was in the Syracuse Symphony Orchestra and it bankrupted in 2011. But at that time, I already had a job waiting for me in the ICU because I was just graduating from nursing school. With nursing, it's harder to not be in demand, but you can lose your job if you do something that contradicts your employer views or you make a involuntary mistake, you lose your license. And hopefully that never happens to anybody, but it has happened to people. And businesses downsize or they underpay you, or they overload you with patients until you feel, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. I have to take care of myself in order to be able to take care of others. So I created these multiple streams of income in my life that are not related to a job. That's what investing is about. When you create assets, that asset, if properly managed, it can produce income for generations. Whereas if you die today, your job is not going to continue producing income for your family, husband, children, whoever your loved ones are. And eventually I started getting all these questions. Well, how come you're almost 50 years old and you're so ridiculously fit and healthy, you don't get sick? And how are you financially independent while working full-time and you manage 3 businesses? So I wrote the book, A Holistic Approach to Self-Confidence. Actually, the whole title is It Really Is Simple, A Holistic Approach to Self-Confidence, a practical guide. I think my biggest marketing point is the practical guide piece of the title, because I'm all about practicality. Mm-hmm. I'm one that has spent hours, 8 to 12 hours a day reading theory of all kinds, whether medicine or musical theory, whichever field I was in my life at the point. I always loved to read books, but eventually you have to get out there and do the work, because nobody can do the work for you. You can read all you want, and you should always continue learning and reading from people that are much more successful than you are. You learn from their successes and from their mistakes, but eventually you build your goals and you pursue those goals till the end. And then you create more goals and crazy goals that seem unattainable at first. And once you attain them, that's what builds your self-confidence to a great level. And in order to be holistic in your self-confidence achievement, and I am speaking from the perspective of somebody who suffered from self-inflicted lack of self-esteem and self-confidence for over 2 decades. That was a really mostly self-inflicted mindset so that I could appear humble to others and please others in many ways. And I realized that was wrong. Very late. I was in my mid-30s when I experienced that midlife crisis, and that's when I changed professions, and everything just went upside down for me to put it back in order. So the book is truly, I've dedicated 5 chapters on health, how to be perpetually healthy. Then there is, of course, one of these chapters is spirituality, very important. Career and finances in two separate discussions, because some people discuss their career, confuse career for financial prosperity. It's not always the case. You need to know how to invest your money that you've saved to continue working for you, and you don't only rely on a job in case you lose the job or your career becomes favorable to the market condition and you have to search for something else, especially now with COVID, that so many people had to resign or got laid off, or you need to adapt to change in a much faster and more demanding way that I had to when I was in my 30s. This was in 2008, and I thought that was a huge change. But what I'm seeing now with younger people is really, really a challenge, and I can see how they get depressed and anxious and very unconfident and insecure with their ability to succeed. The other aspect I'm very fond of is relationships, how you choose your relationships to align with your goals and how you don't compromise yourself for the sake of somebody else and not to hurt others' feelings, but are you going to compromise your goals and dreams and ability to help others in the best way you find ethical for you, while you're taking excellent care of yourself to serve as 100% example to the people you're trying to influence. For example, as a nurse, I cannot allow myself to suffer from any chronic conditions. I cannot eat a diet that is scientifically proven to be unhealthy. Therefore, if I'm seeing a patient, I tell them, okay, I really, as you have diabetes type 2, that's a chronic disease. It's caused by such and such products. I wanted to stop eating these products and switch to these products instead. And that's what I do all day long. So I won't eat something that I'm telling you not to eat to eliminate your disease. I make a very big discussion in the book of the difference between disease elimination versus disease and symptom management. Okay, so with disease and symptom management, you're a long-term asset and commodity to the pharmaceutical industry and healthcare system. When you eliminate your disease, you're your own asset. You have perfect health and you can achieve everything else you want, because the ambitious goals that the very successful people are able to accomplish, you have to have optimal health for the endurance that is required for the work that you need to perform to achieve those goals. So everything is very connected in my experience. And because patients and friends and investment mentees started asking me all these questions, I figured, why don't I compile a system of how I achieved my first million, my second, and my career all combined. And in January of 2020, I started writing the book. I was writing between 3 and 8 hours a day for 2 years. I mean, I wrote it in 6 months, but then the editing and polishing took that much longer because I'm a foreigner. Obviously, I'm from Bulgaria. So my language, I had to make sure it was not repetitive. It was smooth. I presented the ideas in a way that was not abrasive to the reader and understandable and reader friendly, yet very much to the point and not too verbose. So the polishing of a book takes time, but you have to be patient with this process. And eventually we published it in December with my excellent publisher, Classic Day Publishing. And now it's available on my website and on Amazon for whoever wants to read it in paperback or ebook format.
Wow, Alexandra, you've really demonstrated and proved that a human being is capable of amazing, amazing things and achievements, and that the power of transferable skills, the power of versatility, and the immense power of the human brain. I mean, you've moved from liberal arts, humanities, to science, to finance, and it gives me a lot of hope, because I've also gone through this, this feeling of insecurity about, because I'm an arts person, what happens when, people in the STEM field always seem so self-assured and so confident about their income streams, and I'm not from the STEM field. But you've shown us that it is possible, and you've also demonstrated a lot of resilience and a lot of grit. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
If it can be any consolation for anybody, every day I live is an epic war with my laziness, fear of failure, and anxiety. We deal with these, we put them under control and let them guide us through the process so that they are always, anxiety, for example, I use it as an ally. It makes sure I don't skip a step in a process when I want to accomplish something that is of value to me and other people that I'm helping. there is always a way to transform the things that stop you into things that propel you.
Mhm.
And that's the big secret to success, in my humble opinion.
Thank you so much.
You're
I think
welcome.
Elizabeth, you're muted, Elizabeth.
Yeah, and another thing that I want to talk about, because we're living in this world of so much negativity, is that if people talk about you or negative remarks, it shouldn't go on you, and you're defined by other people and what they think. You should define yourself of what you think of
Absolutely.
yourself and who you are. But I need to interrupt this for just 1 second.